Hi guys, welcome back to the Academic Carnival. My name is Dr. Ryan Arthur. This very short and concise presentation will present 6 tools of analysis. These 6 tools of analysis are used for primary research. So if you want to analyze your interviews, if you want to analyze your observations, you can use these 6 tools of analysis. Also for reflections as well. If you are reflecting on your lived experience, you can also use these 6 tools of analysis. Let's proceed. The mode of learning for this session is the explain, activity, example model. I'll explain one of the tools, provide an activity around one of the tools, and provide a concrete example of one of the tools. And feel free to ask questions at any point in the comment box below. Write a comment, write a suggestion, write a question, and I'll get back to you. The session outline is as follows. The first thing we will do is look at a definition of data analysis. This will be followed by presenting the 6 analytical tools, the first of which is to create themes. Second, bad practice versus best practice. Third, expanding statements. Fourth, showing tension, showing conflict. Fifth, prevalence in the wider world. And lastly, deconstructing power. These are the 6 analytical tools which I will go through in much more depth. First of all, what is data analysis? Rather than just give a bland description, I always like to engage with metaphors. So the first metaphor is you are a painter, you are a data analyst, and as a painter, you have a range of paints or a range of different information sources. You have your observations, you have your interviews, you have the literature, journals, articles, books, and you use all of these sources to create a coherent picture. The next metaphor is the manufacturing plant. You take all of these raw materials, all of this primary research, and you put together a product, the motorbike. And the last metaphor is that you are a chef and you bring together all of these different ingredients, these vast ingredients, diverse ingredients, and you bring it together into a dish. This is the essence of data analysis. After you've been through the process of bringing all of these things together, there should be a coherent picture at the end of the process. You should be presenting something which is clear and distinguishable to the person looking at it, reading it, and observing it. Let's start with the first tool. The first tool is creating themes. This is perhaps the most important tool, so we will start here. Once again, I feel it's pertinent to put forward a metaphor to explain the notion of creating themes. We see here a cake, as opposed to just eating this cake in one messy situation. We divide the cake into different parts. And this is essentially what creating themes is about. You identify the major issues, the major themes from your observations or from your interviews. You draw out the major themes and the major issues. You segment all of these themes, you provide the subheadings, and it really makes a difference to your work. And this goes back to the origins of the words, to critique, to analyze. There is this notion that you're separating, that you are delineating, that you are moving around, that you are putting into order. And this really, really points to your critical analysis, your critical awareness, rather than just present one blob, one mass of information. You have chosen to separate it into meaningful parts. This is present within this example as well. A picture is worth 1,000 words. There are a number of themes within this picture. The themes of international diplomacy, the themes of protesting, the theme of the individual himself, Julian Assange, the theme of the media, the cameraman filming this incident. There are a number of ways we can approach this rather than just explain it in one big blob of a paragraph. It will be better to approach all of these issues one aspect at a time. So we have here the example of creating themes. We see example one where it's just one blob of information. The student has seen something and they've just presented their work. However, example two with the red subheadings, it is essentially the same writing as example one. However, the student has sought to analyze her work in an ordered and regimented fashion. And you can just see a few words here and there as subheadings. It makes the difference. It brings that focus. It shows critical analysis, that they were able to identify the major themes within their observations, within their interviews, and speak about each theme at a time. The second tool that we will look at is bad practice versus best practice. In this tool, you will identify bad practice that you observed or that came out of your interviews or your surveys, and you will juxtapose it with best practice, the best practice you derived from professional frameworks, charters, government publications, or academic publications. So on one hand, we see bad practice. This is something that you experienced, something that you saw, something that came out of your interviews. And then we have best practice, which comes from the literature, which comes from professional frameworks, which comes from professional charters. And we compare and contrast this bad practice which we have seen with best practice. So I have here an example of this. Bad practice. In my observation, I found that books were only used in one area of the setting. However, in best practice, it states that it is essential to place books throughout the setting in order to normalize learning. So on one hand, we can write and explain about what we've seen, very descriptive. However, we can place this against best practice, something that Linden suggested. Another example, the bad practice which we observe, that there was no staff member that was responsible for coordinating training and there were no records kept. This is something that you experience. This is something that came out of interviews. However, in the literature, we know that having a staff member responsible for coordinating the training and keeping the training records up to date, we know that this is a fundamental aspect of best practice. So what we see in real life, we compare, we contrast, or we offer a solution in the form of best practice. At this point, I would give a group task in which I would ask the students to tell me about the harms of this particular bad practice. What are the harms of there being no staff member that is responsible for coordinating training, and the harms of not having records kept? And I'll juxtapose this with the benefits. What are the benefits of good practice? What is the benefits of having a staff member that is solely responsible for coordinating training? And this staff member sole responsibility is to keep training records up to date. What are the benefits of this approach? Rather than just speak about bad practice, it's also good to talk about the harms. Rather than talk about best practice, it's also good to talk about the benefits. Like we have here a paragraph. I have colored the paragraph into 4 parts. So we see the management in my care home has not established any links with GP surgeries. This sentence in red is where you state the bad practice you observed. And in purple, you explain why this bad practice is problematic. Why are there so much problems with this bad practice? So in red, you start the sentence, your observation, something that came out of your interviews. And in purple, you offer reasons why this is bad practice. You put forward the number of problems that come about through adopting this practice. And rather than leave it there in green, you link the bad practice to best practice. To address such problems, the DSG stipulate that care homes should establish strong links with GP surgeries. So the old Mandarin phrase, don't complain about the darkness, light a candle. So as opposed to just critiquing the bad practice, you're putting something forward. You're linking that bad practice, the best practice in green, and finally at the end, you state the benefits of best practice. So this is just a simple formula of how to write a paragraph where you look at best practice and how it can be juxtaposed, how it can be compared, or how you can offer best practice in its place. The next tool, expanding state. In this tool, if your case study or your observation, or you want to include extracts of your interviews into your dissertation, you can do this and analyze the statements or dialogue to try to identify wider themes. Try to expand these statements. Statements and dialogue are rarely neutral. Much of our dialogue points to wider themes. For instance, there was a study on attitudes towards universities. Out of this study came this statement. Somebody said this statement. There are only 2 real universities in England. Which universities is this respondent talking about? Oxford and Cambridge. What does this point to? Classism and a whole range of issues that this person believes that there are only 2 real universities in England. So just these few words point to wider themes, wider issues. This is how you expand statements. And also another study, a study on the significance of hair in the Afro-Caribbean community. My daughter has good hair. This statement is only 5 words, but it means so much. It points to a particular history. It points to a particular mindset. It points to a particular cultural norm. From these 5 words, you can write volumes about this. If that's good hair, what is bad hair within the context of this community? So I have here another example. You could have come across this with an interview or a statement, or somebody mentioned this in your primary research. I don't pay you to answer me back, just do it. From this statement, a number of theories we can draw upon. Authoritarian leadership style, perhaps. The status between the leader and his or her subordinates. And also the communication style. Just from these few words, you can write pages about these different aspects, these different themes and issues that come out of this statement. I have here a number of statements, one in red, one in white, one in green, and all of these statements point to wider issues, wider themes. For instance, in red, I don't know what inquiry-based learning is. What does this point to? Why is this practitioner unaware of this popular phrase? And this is all analysis. You're taking these few words and expanding them and trying to reason and trying to find out the who, why, what, where from these statements. Also in green, those type of children always act like that. What is behind that statement? The fact that the manager said this openly in public is also very important. In white, a teaching assistant told me we tried to make sure that our center is acceptable a day or so before Ofsted inspections. What does this say about the particular type of management that is being employed here? Very reactive. Instead of being proactive, they're very reactive to the Ofsted inspections. So just these few words, you could really expand them and point to wider issues, wider themes. I have here an example of expanded statements. You would at first start with the issue at hand. In this case, the manager informed the team, make sure you make the classroom acceptable for the Ofsted inspection tomorrow. This statement can be analyzed in several ways. So they start very descriptively by just describing the speech at hand. Then in purple, they analyze the speech, not in one blob, but they break it down in different aspects. And this is how you would expand statements. You would at first start very descriptive, then you'll move on and you'll analyze each aspect of this speech, and you will try to point to wider themes. The wider themes that this person pointed to in this example is issues around reactive management and also around regulatory standards. A good example of expanding statements. The next tool is showing some type of tension, some type of back and forth, some type of conflict. So how do we demonstrate tension? We demonstrate tension by showing the difficulties in interpreting the data. It's not easy, it's a complicated affair. So we have to demonstrate this. So how do we demonstrate this? You offer one opinion. You have an opinion about data. You have an opinion about lived experience. You have an opinion about the statement or something that came out of the interviews. You have an opinion about the observation. And you contrast this with a counter opinion of the data or a counter opinion of the statement or observation. And once you show these two things, you try to resolve the tension between these two opinions. You can do either of two things. You can choose one of the two opinions and explain why you chose it, or you can sit on the fence. I can't choose between these two opinions, and you explain why it's difficult to choose between these two opinions. I have here an example. One opinion, one thought. I observed very little creativity from the children. You arrived at the setting, you observed the setting for a number of days, and you saw very little creativity from the children. However, a counter opinion, during the interviews, the practitioners believed that there was a lot of creativity. So we have these two things now. On one hand, you didn't observe very much creativity. However, what came out of the interviews was that practitioners themselves who had worked at that placement, who had worked at that setting, believed there was a lot of creativity. So now you have tension. Now it's your job to resolve this tension. You have to choose one of the two opinions and explain why. Or if you can't choose between both of these opinions, you explain why. Maybe both of these opinions are too weighty. Maybe there's so much evidence behind both of these two opinions that it's impossible to choose one. So you really explain this and you really talk about this. So in this situation where this person observed there was very little creativity, but the practitioners who worked there believed there was a lot of creativity, maybe a way to resolve this tension is that the person that observed creativity, they had a particular definition for creativity. And the people that believed there was a lot of creativity, they had a more wider definition of what creativity is. So that is one way you can resolve this tension. You think a certain way, and another group think a certain way, and the way that you resolve this tension is that perhaps you have different interpretations or different definition of creativity. Another example of this is, on one hand, all of the interviewees stated that their experience of the nursing profession was very positive. You come to a setting and you realize that everybody working at that particular setting was very positive about their experience. However, we know the data, the literature points to the pressures at work and stagnant pay and high job dissatisfaction within the nursing profession. So on one hand, we have satisfaction of the nursing profession within this particular setting, and on another hand, the data speaks to the opposite of this. So we have tension, we have a conflict. So we now have to resolve this tension between these two opinions. We have to choose one of the two opinions and explain why we chose it. Or if we can't choose, then we have to explain why. So in this situation, it could be that this particular study or the studies that point to job dissatisfaction are within metropolitan areas, are within London and the surrounding area. However, the particular placement that you went to was maybe in the north of the country, which didn't suffer the pressures and demands that the metropolitan hospitals suffer from. So it could be a range of things to explain why you chose one opinion over another. It's just about you choosing which one is more appropriate. So we have an example here. I observe very little creativity from the children. In red, state your observation. In purple, state the counter observation. However, they love this word. The more you can say however, the better. However, during the interviews, practitioners believe that there was a lot of creativity. And in green, you resolve the tension. So this three-part aspect, you state the observation, state the counter observation, and resolve the contradiction. This is just one way to approach tension. So you show the tension by showing the two different opinions, one in red, one in purple, and in green, you resolve this contradiction. The fifth tool is linking your observation to the wider world. This tool is very important. You observe an action in your workplace and you link it to prevalence of that particular action in the wider world. So for instance, on this occasion, on two occasions, in this student's observation, she noticed that the girls were using the book corner more than boys. This is a particular action that she observed. Then she links it to the wider prevalence. She links it to a particular study which explains that this is commonplace, that girls tend to use the book corner more than boys. So she spots something, she sees something in the real world, and she connects it to the wider prevalence in the wider world. So just to see what it looks like, I've made this chart. Your observation of an action, the setting had a large amount of unpaid volunteers, and you connect it to the prevalence in the UK. Nationally, there is an increase in reliance on unpaid staff. In reception classes, as many as 16% of staff are unpaid volunteers. So what you've experienced, what you've seen in your setting through your interviews, you connect it to a wider prevalence in the UK. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a wider trend, or wider issues. The setting was severely understaffed. Is this common or specific to this particular setting? Have that discussion. I noticed that child A finished their reception year with very little language and literacy skills. Is this common? Is this unique? Is this isolated? Connected to the prevalence in the UK? And if you can't connect it to the prevalence in the UK, explain the isolation of this particular action. Explain why this action may be unique for this particular setting. This is all analysis. So we have here an example of linking what you observe to wider trends, to the wider world. So you would state your observation. In this situation here, this student observed that there were significant gaps in the training of staff at the Bellevue care home. And in green, they're linking this observation to a wider trend and they're providing evidence for this. This is not exceptional. Several studies found that staff working in residential and nursing homes are not being provided with the training they need to support adults with complex needs. So they're really going above and beyond with this rather than just looking at their particular care home. They say, no, this is not exceptional. This is not an isolated incident. This is part of a wider trend. This is all part of analysis. The last tool we will discuss is deconstructing power. For a study to be considered critical, it must uncover the power dynamics. How do we deconstruct power? There are a number of ways to do this, one of which is to look at Northhouse's 6 bases of power. After doing a literature review, he extracted 6 bases of power, which are common themes in the literature. The first base of power is reverent power. This is where followers revere, identify, admire, and respect the leader. Second base of power is expert power. This is derived from having a high level of knowledge that other members do not possess. Another form of power is legitimate power. This is associated with having high organizational status or formal job authority. Reward power. This is derived from having the capacity to provide rewards to others. Coercive power. This is derived from having the capacity to penalize or punish others. And information power. This is derived from possessing knowledge that others want or need. So this is just one way to look at the different forms of power. There are many others. And from these 6 bases, we can try to identify who fits into where when we are observing a setting or during the interview process. We can try to identify which form of power is being exercised. This is just one way of looking how power can be deconstructed within primary evidence. An example of this is that you would state the real world example in red. When Sandy discussed the organization's new plans, the whole office paid attention. You connect it to theory in purple. Sandy's ability to captivate her staff is an example of what Daft and Markic refer to as expert power. So you've connected this real world experience to theory. And in green, you explain the theory rather than just leave it as expert power. Explain what expert power is. Whenever you introduce a theory, it's always good practice to explain what that theory is in relation to how you used it. Now that we have reached the end of our discussion, I will leave you with some writing tips. The first of which is signal a transition. This is also known as signposting. This is when you walk the person that's marking your work or you walk the person that's reading your work through a process, through your thought process, rather than take it as a given or take it for granted that they are aware of how you are thinking, they are aware of the material that you're using, they are aware of the analytical tools which you are employing. Always signal the transition, signpost your way through. Turning now to the second observation. Moving on from this point, having defined creativity, I will now move on to discuss this. Walk them through the process. Cautious language is also very important to use cautious language. When analyzing or criticizing, use cautious language. because you may be right or you may be wrong. So it will be wrong in this case to use definite language. Always use cautious language. Take a step back. This may be due to that. It could be because of this. It appears that it would seem that arguably taking a step back, I always say talk as if you're a politician. Don't get yourself trapped by saying definite things about things which may be right or things which may be wrong. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. Please comment, make recommendations, make suggestions in the comment box below. Thank you for listening once again.